Hello, Meredith.
Hi, Roger. Thanks for having me. It's been really amazing to hear everybody. I haven't had a chance to hear all of yesterday's, but I heard a lot of today's talks. And it's mind-blowing what everyone's doing with all the technologies and all the way that everybody is really trying to make a difference with what it is that we're doing on the planet. So it's been eye-opening for me to hear a lot of your talks, and I can't wait to hear all of them through the recordings afterwards. So, and Jonathan's presentation was really beautiful too, because it's starting to bring us into the body. And what I'm going to talk about today is in the body. And I just keep thinking that if I have this in, it's going to be a little bit better for a moment. But so I want to share with you that I know nothing of mathematics, and I think that maybe some of the people who are on today are going to be able to even explain a little bit more about the science of what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling and what I'm sensing. So I'm going to take you through not only your bodies, but also just kind of let the left brain sit aside for a moment and go into your right brain. And we're going to go into a little bit of a journey where I'm going to explain where this information comes from and why I do this, and how long it's been that I've been doing it. And ultimately, I'm seeing a geometry in the neural frequencies of the body. And it gives us a really powerful insight into how Eastern and Western medical theories can meet, which of course have been as different as the quantum field and the relativistic field, right? You know, the holy grail is to try to find the link between the two. And yet we're not really talking about that yet in a biological field. I mean, there is quantum biology that's a very beginning kind of field in physics, in biology. But we're not really looking at what the Eastern concepts and acupuncture and what have you might have to do with Western physiology. And I believe that the bridge between both the quantum and relativistic world and the Eastern and Western theories are understanding geometry and fractals. But I failed math in high school. So I want to stress that when I realized that what I was looking at after many, many years was geometry, I got really depressed because I thought, that's the end of the road. I just spent 15 years trying to figure something out. And I've just arrived at the world where I know so little about. And then since then, I've met people like Jonathan and Marshall Lefferts and Nassim Haramein and different geometers who have given me the language to be able to finally, after 25 years, express to you in pictures and words and whole programs that I've created, how our neural frequencies actually create geometric structure. And I'm going to share with you a geometry that the body has taught me. And so we're just going to go on a little journey into the body. So I'll start sharing my screen. So the work that I do, I coined Fractal Anatomy many years ago before you could Google it and find anything on it. Now you're finding things that are relating to fractals and anatomy, which is exciting, and that I figured would happen and which will be happening more. And that what I'm really working with in seeing the body as a shiatsu therapist, and then somebody who trained extensively through shiatsu and acupuncture, and I've been teaching since the 90s and all of that, the understanding of there being frequency in the body and frequency of the nervous system. So we're just going to take a little tour, and I'm just going to show you the concept and the idea of course, we have the electromagnetic spectrum, and all of you are working in a lot of really powerful ways in and around this spectrum and beyond. And that's really exciting because, of course, we know that the electromagnetic spectrum is infinite. We just don't know really what's beyond these wavelengths. And I find it, you know, kind of so typical of us humans that we have to make them as straight lines with lines in between them, which is, of course, not how they emit or how they function so much. But this is how our linear minds think. And when we have to start thinking in fractals and patterns, our linear constructs have to really go away in order to see depth to things. So I want to share with you just a little bit of a visual idea of where we're going with this. So just sit back and absorb, and hopefully you'll be able to hear this. So I'm just going to stop sharing for. So I'm going to go over a little bit about what all that was. And you can see that there's a lot of different kinds of geometry within that. And what I really want to stress is that this was an entirely sensory experience for me. And we're going to look at what that geometry is in the body. And that geometry is very fractal. And interestingly, just recently, I've had a couple of different geometers in the last month show up in my life who have validated that geometry beyond it just being like a nice piece of art actually really standing up to having a lot of structural stability to it. And it's continually teaching me. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about me so that you know I do this. Where did it go? Let's see what happens here. Wait a second. Where did it go? It shut down. So on the top left there is my grandfather. He was a very powerful healer. I don't like really using that word because I think we're all healers, but he was pretty remarkable. And he was from Finland, and he had one of the first massage practices in Toronto, where I grew up in Canada, in the 30s, before anyone really knew what massage was. And so if I do anything in the bodywork field, it's because of this lineage. And my mother was a very well-known dancer in Canada as well. So my grandfather worked a lot on the company and different people like that. And my mother went on, my grandfather stretched for a living, and my mother went on to really understand how to unstick your body and realign your posture and get into your body in ways that really improve your health. So I grew up in that environment. And my mother created the technique that we call is Somatic Stretch, and I created a training program with her about 10 years ago. So we teach people how to get into their bodies and unlock tension. And the geometry and the fractal nature of the body is something the body has taught me since 95, when I had a particular experience that really radically increased my sensory awareness and has led me on a journey ever since to understand what I was feeling. And that's why I think it's important to understand that this is a sensory experience, because when we're actually looking at the ideas of what we're coming to in geometry, it really shows that it's not just a left brain pursuit, it's where the left and the right brain really meet. So interestingly, while I was trying to piece together aspects of this geometry that I felt in the body, and I was using little balls of plasticine and toothpicks, and things were falling apart, and I would go to the kids' store and try to find some kind of geometry model that would work, but nothing was really working until I had it made in copper. I had a woman that I know from Finland send me a book to this wonderful woman and say, look what your ancestors have been doing for generations. Now, this is a woman named Ayakoski, and she's one of the best himmeli makers. These are called himmeli. And she grows all of the rye, and she dries it all, and then cuts everything into fine little perfect bits, and then uses a needle and thread and threads everything together. And you can see the incredible precision. I mean, imagine just even trying to dry rye in these perfect linear forms. And these are things that the Finns hang over their Christmas tables at dinner time, dinner tables at Christmas time, and different things like that. So himmeli are something that are very well known. And the translation is somewhere between Swedish and Finnish of meaning the sky. And I thought it was fascinating that these are the structures that I see in the body. These are the planes of energy that I see. And somebody actually told me that this is what my ancestors have been doing, and we don't really know the origin of where it comes from. So I thought that was really fascinating. And of course, these structures look very much like the geometries that we're working with. And of course, we can see how, for instance, we'll have the structures that will actually create circles out of everything as well. So we've got different, IVMs and different kinds of ways that we're actually seeing vectors, and yet at the same time, of course, we're representing circles within that. So I want to take you through, I just recently created a Meridian program, and because I'm not sure how many people know much about Eastern energy systems in relation to the West, there's a little 10-minute piece that I pulled from a program that I just recently launched on Meridians. And so I just want to take you a little bit through that so that you can just kind of enjoy the journey through your body. Within the Meridian system, wide, complex, and layered roots have been converted into an efficient shorthand for busy practitioners using needles. That this shorthand is so extensive, consistent, and thorough is testimony to just how comprehensive the original bank of Chinese medical knowledge must have been, and how far-sighted the Meridian chart's originators actually were. The meridians, shrugged one student not so long ago, are just lines drawn on the body. But this is much like saying, when looking up at the vastness of the night sky, that the stars are only white dots on black canvas. Meridians are considered by many to be a means of tracking the nervous system. They're a roadmap of the body left by the ancient Chinese physicians who used this knowledge to read distortion in the body and used this insight to heal through a deeper understanding of what we now call bioelectricity. Bioelectricity is the term for electric potentials and currents produced by or occurring within living organisms. Bioelectric potentials are generated by a variety of biological processes and generally range in strength from 1 to a few hundred millivolts. That's what we know so far. Now consider what happens when we take a crystal and shine light through it. You can't see anything until it hits something solid, like a wall. If we drew a solid line between the colors displayed on the wall and then removed the crystal, we would see only 6 lines, and it would seem to carry very little meaning. It's interesting that there are 6 lines of meridians on both the upper and lower parts of the body. The lines left on the wall represent an entire process of refracted light frequency, and those lines are a 2-dimensional example that signify a great deal more at work before colors appeared on the wall. Keep in mind, too, that you can't even see the colors until they arrive at the wall. Meridians are like this, with the invisible not being seen until it hits something solid, where we can see it and trace it, like on the skin. Forget for a moment that the meridians you see in 2D on the body is all there is to see, and pretend that you can see the meridians as something more like sunlight that shines, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Consider the skin as a thin, visible layer of tissue paper between the inner world and the outer world. Imagine the people who came before us, who could see and sense these frequencies well enough to leave us a map on the skin of our bodies, to tell of the energies that exist before physical form. However, the meridian system we learn today is a shorthand version of complex layered roots that represent a very extensive system of knowledge. Japanese sensei Tetsuro Sato writes in his book on Shinso Shiatsu, "It's hard to imagine a single chart illustrating the body's multiple meridian systems, their interrelationships, point conjunctions, and connections. That the sages of long ago untangled the web and designed a map of the essentials is an accomplishment that remains unsurpassed to this day." The rainbow on the wall example, as well as the electromagnetic spectrum, illustrate that frequency expresses itself as bands of light, among the other rays of the spectrum that we also can't see. It would be rational to assume that if the frequency surrounds us, it is within us. How can frequency constitute all the heavens, the stars, the cosmos, our planet, our telephones and technologies, and yet not apply to our bodies and minds? We have not yet traced the frequencies beyond the electromagnetic spectrum. Our physical reality lies ready to unfold within the spectrum's more distant discoveries. Here's a fractal idea. Fractal meaning pattern that remains the same even while it scales from small to large. Before we make a house or a shirt or a table or a chair, we have the thought. Between the thought and the thing we make, we have a blueprint. Even if it's something as simple as a chair, we will have drawn out what we want to do before we do it. Meridians and other Eastern energy systems are the blueprint of the human body between wherever the thought of us came from and the body that we live in. Western medicine does not yet acknowledge the energy and therefore the blueprint of the body, and can do only something once something has become manifest in the physical form. Illness is not detectable on a more subtle level in Western medicine until it becomes obvious. Eastern medical systems focus much more on the blueprint to effect change to the physical, preferably before illness occurs, but even afterwards. The difference between fixing ourselves or fixing a house we've built is that the body is a living, pulsing organism, and therefore more adaptable to change than a solid, inanimate structure. There are 12 primary meridians that correlate to organ systems, and 2 more taken from what are called the 8 extraordinary meridians that correlate to different energy patterns to make 14 meridians in total. These two extra meridians, borrowed from the 8, are called Ren and Du, and they essentially bisect the body, one running down the middle of the front from top to tail, and one running down the middle of the back. In acupuncture school, we're taught that Ren and Du are two connected but different lines, hence its description of running down the front or back. However, I encourage you to consider them as one single plane of light or energy that runs as a continual line through the body instead of around it from top to tail back up to the top again. This is essential to considering the frequencies of the body, that these lines are actually planes of energy moving from one side of the body or arm or leg to the other. One thing that confuses those less familiar with the meridian system when working with practitioners such as acupuncturists or shiatsu therapists is that we hear lung and we assume this means that something may be wrong with our lungs. This may or may not be true because the meridians are more like tarot cards than how we perceive an organ to be in the West. The meridians speak to distortions prior to outcome. They speak to the subtle fluctuations in conversation that the body goes through while living. Just because you talk about building a house doesn't mean you've already built it. And in that conversation, there is room for much change. Just because you talk about an organ, it doesn't mean that it's damaged. It means it may need some help, or it may be a signpost merely offering an indication of the weather inside that day. We can also consider that meridians look much like dermatomes, which are the zones on our bodies that Western medicine has found to be sections on the skin that are innervating a particular area of skin, giving us the ability to feel sensation due to a nerve feeding an area of the body. However, we would not consider the zone on the skin to exist on its own. We know it comes from deep inside, communicating from the interior, where the peripheral nerves speak to the brain and the spinal cord, the depths communicating with the exterior. Consider how much we can learn about meridians when we start to see the angles and planes that energy creates. Geometry naturally forms out of these otherwise straight or jagged lines on the body to reveal an intricate inner dance that also follows the ancient understanding of geometric precision in all things. So as we move through other energy systems of the body and we consider planes of charge or currency moving through the body, think beyond the two-dimensional lines you can see and appreciate the depth that is involved. Let's look at the meridians as stars in the night sky and read beyond the superficial to consider their depth, the story they tell, and the paths revealed to us from the inside out. So that's a little bit about what I do. And really what it's meaning is that we're really approaching a time that we're able to understand frequency. And I was watching a show last night about the senses and how we like to look at 5 senses as if there's something different, when in fact it's just a whole electrical storm. The whole way you're hearing me, the whole way you're seeing is just through electrical conduction, of course, as we know now, through the body, but we're not really looking at what that means. And so this level of sensory awareness gives us an understanding of what geometry is in the body. And so what that means, I think ultimately, as I start to get into how this can help you and what that means, is that I used to think and I still do really, that it's neural frequencies I'm looking at. The nervous system is running on a sodium potassium pump. There's electrical charges happening all the time. And we are electrical storms in motion on huge levels that our brains don't really fully understand. But beyond that, I began to really understand that I'm looking at light in the body. And I thought we understood, you guys would know more about this than I would. I thought we understood light because it's here and we know what it is, but apparently we don't. So this is where the more visionary right brain aspect of my work is really interesting in meeting the left brain side of what it is that we know. And there's this beautiful picture here that I showed in the video. This is a man named Clay Taylor, and I love his work. And this is a sphere that he shot light through and took a photograph of. So it's not a drawn piece. It's what light does when moving through a sphere. And I do love the fact that it does have a lot of correlations when I'm working into the body, which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute, how this is exactly what it's showing are these bands of light and frequency that move through the body. So for instance, if you see where this angle off to the side comes and kind of shoots through the shoulder a little bit, if you made it really more anatomically correct, it would be right at that point, at that nagging point at the top of your shoulder. And how we're trained in somatic therapies today is to look at muscles and nerves and the anatomy of that and the origins and insertions and what have you. But when we recognize that we're fabric, and this is what the body's taught me, these internal pulls begin from the inside. It's not just about your muscle. And so we use these, these terms either in massage or in shiatsu and acupuncture, say, oh, it's your QL, it's your quadratus lumborum, that's a problem in your low back, or we'll call it bladder 23 in acupuncture, and it's kidney related and what have you. And yet we have to think more deeply into the body. And so my whole life's work has been about actually explaining what that means in the fusion of Eastern and Western medicine. So we're going to go a little bit more into the idea of if you're taking the body is more like tissue paper, really, and that whatever is on our inner world is very much in our outer world. And we stop at the body and we think about an inch in, but there's this entire life that happens both between the inner and outer body that is not separate in any way. And so as you were seeing in the other video that I showed, when we start really looking at chakras, for instance, not as just circles on the body, but centers in the middle, we see how there's this fractal iteration going from every singularity of any proton really to a chakra, to the planets, to the universe. And in that way, we are very much the microcosm of the macrocosm. So I showed you some different systems of the body in Eastern medicine. This is the bladder meridian in acupuncture and shiatsu. And it's also from the East, the Ida Pingala and Sushumna of the Kundalini energy through Ayurvedic understanding. And so rather than explaining all of these things in detail, that is what my programs and my work are about, where we can see how the geometry comes together. I'm just going to show you briefly what we already went through in the videos. This is something called Sanjiao or triple heater in acupuncture. And it's got kind of a confusing theory behind it in certain ways, but there's this understanding of there being 3 burners, upper, middle, lower through the body. And I found that the best way to explain what I see fractally in the body is to explain that there's an upper, middle, and lower to anything. So you can even work your calf, and even in the lower part of the calf, it's been known for thousands of years that this affects the lower part of the body so intensely that you have to be careful in first trimester if working or needling a woman who's pregnant, because it can really cause distortion and upset in and around the uterus. And I've seen this directly in my friend giving birth to my first godchild, and using these points in the ankle really, really strongly to help her give birth. And she said afterwards, it felt like I had reached up and grabbed the baby's head and started to pull down. So 5,000 years of documented Eastern medicine isn't wrong. But there's a lot that's been lost to us as well. And I believe that the middle part, just to use your calf as an example, middle part of your calf relates to the middle part of your body, and the upper relates to upper. So there's this tree, there's this kaleidoscopic expression through the body that we also see in Western medicine that I'll show you in a moment. So again, it's taking the idea that even if we're going to talk about chakras, and there's a whole story there about how we've how we've used the 7 really to serve our intellectual purposes in certain ways. I think that chakras are, I think there are trillions of them through the body. I think that they are, if a singularity can be found in every proton, a black hole in every proton, as Nassim Haramein talks about, then a chakra is right there. However, we need to start thinking, even if we take 7 to look at, or even 3, that they're not sitting on the body, they are inside the body. And so as I was showing as well, we have to start looking at planes of energy. And this is what the body started to show me through this sensory experience that I had. So the sensory experience was very extreme in 1995, and it really was very life-changing for me and very shocking, and I didn't understand it. And I guess you would call it a Kundalini experience, but I think we have so many different ways of determining that. All I can say is that I had a lot of auditory and visual hallucinations for a month for no known reason. And it was like an electrical storm in my body and my mind the entire time. And I was so traumatized, quite honestly, by the event that I couldn't do anything else but try to figure out what all this was. And the body started to show me this sensory world of where meridians actually weave into these 3 lines. So you can be thinking about a wrist or a point on the hand, but everything's weaving like a braid into these three lines through the body. And yet they're not lines, they're like a tornado. They're the ultimate spiral. And you have to have, in order to have the center of it, that is the eye of the silence and where all the power is in a tornado or a hurricane, then you also have to have the edges on the side. And we need to look at it like 3 straight lines because that's what our brain understands. But of course, people here will understand spiral graphics much more so. When you bring the geometry together, when you explain all of this theory, which is quite extensive, you find these intersection points in the body. And this is where I'm going to explain what this means to you and your tension. So when you have neck tension or shoulder tension or frozen shoulder or elbow problems or carpal tunnel issues, where it's really coming from is this top right hand red dot, we'll say next to the green center heart chakra. And these points on each side that really draw in and pull what we know as the brachial plexus, which is further up, but that is all contracting. This is actually where the pull of the fabric is. So when you are stretching or releasing your own body, and instead of thinking about your neck or shoulder, you're seeing in to where the actual pull is, the nervous system responds and releases much more effectively. And if you're a bodywork therapist working with something like this, again, as I was saying, on the top of the shoulder, we think, and we're trained to think, even when working on the body, even if we're talking meridians in Eastern medicine, we're really only thinking an inch or 2 into the body. But if you know how to hold an area of the body and think into core here, then the entire nervous system jumps and releases, and you can release tension on a much more profound level and draw a lot of blood and nutrients into areas in order to be able to regenerate the body by releasing tension. So that's one example out of many. I will leave it at that for the moment. These points in the bottom are not entirely anatomically correct, but they're further down in the pelvis. And this is really pivotal to being able to unlock a lot of leg issues and lower back issues. So again, it's not about just working the quadratus lumborum or working your gluteal muscles. It's about understanding that neurologically there's a stream in the body. There's this resonance in the body that when we can understand what the map work is and even think in that direction, people start to get results either on themselves or as therapists on other people very rapidly. So of course, in Western medicine, we have things like Wilder Penfield's whole drawing of the homunculus, of how there's a body in the brain in that way. And we have different ways of seeing how, and this is why you can Google fractal anatomy now and actually find certain things. In the hippocampus, as well as the homunculus, there is this understanding that you could actually track fractal understanding of the anatomy of the body. And so that's coming out more and more now. And that explains why in the East, or in other more alternative therapies, we would say the eye or the ear or the hand or the foot are a mirror for the whole body. And it would stand to reason that if the body works this way, and we have proof of that in Western medicine, that it wouldn't just be parts of the body that would represent the whole body. The whole body would have to represent every other part of the body and be part of the whole. So I feel that this is where our fractal understanding and our pattern recognition, that is a very ancient way of thinking and seeing and working with the world that we seem to all be getting the same memo of is now something that's actually giving us a lot more information biologically about what's going on. So this is the general shape of geometry, but again, it's planes of energy moving through the body. And if you look at what that actually looks like in the body, it's something like this in order to be able to get into core areas. And yet it's as equally valid one way as it is in the other way. And if you look at this shape, for instance, I had no understanding of the Kabbalic structure whatsoever, but as you saw in Jonathan's presentation, that's all part and parcel of the sacred geometric dance of the cosmos and the body. And that seems to be very apparent in this three-dimensional shape that first began to appear to me. But because it's equally as valid one way as it is another, what we have is this very hexagonal crystalline shape through the body. And that's really the geometry that presented itself to me. And of course, this geometry is fractal. I'm just freezing it in the torso to make a point. What it looks like when I could finally pull it out of the body is this. And this is the geometry that a couple of geometers have. And one is actually making an entire video of, because there's phi all over this shape. And there's a lot to actually say about it. And it apparently does a couple of things in geometry that are not common in geometries that have excited the two geometers that I just recently met, neither of whom knew each other. So I'm learning some interesting things about it. Now, I have my program Fractal Anatomy and the Geometry of Healing, and Nassim Haramein on his Resonance Science Foundation also has that program out there. And I gave a talk at their 2019 conference before the world changed. And so this is Nassim Haramein's tetrahelix. This is how they are drawing from the vacuum in order to run tests also on plants, as you guys were talking about earlier. And it's based on a clockwise and counterclockwise formation. And what's interesting about it, as they're pulling from the vacuum, they're obviously showing these results that they are using this tetrahelix formation that is based on much the same structure as the shape that I've pulled from the body in order to be able to greatly increase plant growth. And what I love is that they are just so very similar. And that to me is really the poetry of geometry. So on the left side of the screen on Nassim's tetrahelix, this is a very left brain concept. And on the right side, it's a sheerly sensory concept coming from the right brain. And I think the similarities will prove themselves to be even more similar than I already suspect and what I've learned so far. So really, when we're looking at what this form has to do with the body and with the neural frequencies of how the electrical conduction in our bodies work, this is really a core structure through the center of the body. This is the impulse and information center of the brain and the spinal cord, emitting not only electrical impulses, but I believe light. And of course, as all frequency runs, it has to work in a format of frequency existing more than in just one place. But when we're looking at things and trying to describe them, of course, we have to break them down. And so this is a geometry that is like grabbing a light beam to just hold on to it for a moment and get a center of an idea of how it really is very much the center geometry of a toroidal structure around certainly the human body as I see it, and another geometry to add to the conversation of what it is that we understand around toroidal structure. So just in finishing up again, that is the artwork of Clay Taylor, and you can see how those three vertical lines run through and match very much so with the three vertical lines in through the body. And after that, there's a whole bunch of really fascinating theories. So that's what I teach and talk about. I teach people who work with their own bodies how to understand that. I have, just so that you know a little bit more about what I do, I have this Fractal Anatomy and Geometry of Healing program at geometryofhealing.com is my website. And it has all of the information in theory of, in the first section, not only what pi and phi and Fibonacci are in relation to the body and what we're talking about, but what we're talking about in physics and where the correlations are. And then in the level 2, we're going right into all of the different energy systems of the body and how they correlate and how people can work directly with themselves with that. So that's my website, geometryofhealing.com. And I have a couple of different newsletters there, either for geometry, or for the somatic stretch. And I teach somatic stretch every week right here, a couple of times a week. And ever since COVID came out, I have all classes free or by donation. The whole thing runs by donation because I believe that anybody who wants to learn how to reduce their own stress levels, open up tension, and learn about their bodies, that education should be free and available to people. And if they can't pay, then they should still be able to come. So I do that twice a week. And I also leave recordings up for people to be able to see classes, even if they can't come to the live classes. And I have a membership available for people who want to actually download and use the classes later. This is my mother who created the technique and that I carried on from the time of when I was 18, quite a number of years ago. And this is our training program that we work with in helping people really gain a lot of flexibility and motility and understanding through their body. And I weave in all of this fractal information. So we have that training program that we do. And then Jonathan and I have been running these great microcosm and macrocosm discussions. We just recently had Scott Onstott on. We've been running that through Nassim Harameyn's Resonance Science Foundation. And I'm hoping to be able to have more guests on that. And that sums up really where I am and what I do. What time is it?
Wonderful.
Yeah, 10 minutes too.
You.
There we go.
Yeah, so folks, we can take some questions. And there's some comments here.
I'm just looking at them now. Yeah. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. I've taken your Fractal Anatomy course with would highly recommend it. Thank you. Also, I'm a big fan of your somatic stretch classes. They have helped me tremendously. Big thank you for your teachings. Thank you so much, Julianne. I appreciate that.
There's a question here from Greg. Greg's just put his hand up. Greg,
sure.
Just yeah, there you go, Greg. Can you unmute?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yep. We can.
Okay, I thought I unmuted. Yeah, I have a question. Your opinion on you started the discussion about the East and West coming together in medicine, and that's pretty much what we're dealing with today. And my life has been pretty dual, living in Mexico and the United States, and one is very Western medicine, and in Mexico it's much more Eastern oriented, what's available. The Western medicine I've been involved with has been resulted in failed back surgery syndrome, meaning that I've had a couple surgeries. So what's your or opinion, or how do you feel about once the actual spine has been altered through surgery, how that impacts then having deep tissue massage being done, acupuncture being done? Does that affect the meridians? Does that impact what I should or should not be doing?
Good question. First of all, it's great that we do have the Western medicine in order to be able to fix things like that once they are past a point of repair that your body can't function well. And when we do have surgeries and things of that nature, there's a lot of other compensatory things that happen through the body. So when you've got we'll call it a spasm, right? Because when you have a surgery in one area, everything really tightens up in a lot of ways. And that's going to affect other parts of the body. You can alleviate and relieve strain that's additional on top of where the scar tissue is and where everything like really pulls into hold by even working your foot. And so it's really important to get bodywork therapy, whether you have a surgery or whether you're pre-surgery, post-surgery, what have you. The only thing that I've really found not very complementary is when they do prolotherapy. And that's, unless I'm mistaken, from what I understand, you're injecting something into an area to stabilize a joint by creating irritation and kind of binding everything together. And the stretch and the release is helping unwind things. So you're trying to do two different things at the same time. So I would question it there, and I would research it a little bit more. But because the body has so much tension that it's having to hold in so many different areas, finding ways to actually release it, whether it just be through the limbs, which are very powerful ways of doing that, and going to people definitely who know how to work with the body and do acupuncture. I had an acupuncture session yesterday and I slept for about 3 hours afterwards. It's very healing in the body. And you're giving the body's wisdom a chance to actually work with things. Western medicine's there to save it when it's gone too far and to give you some sort of alternative than just pain. And that it's actually very complementary to work with these other things. If you want to go more into your actual issue, on my website, you can go to book and we can have a free 20-minute call and just talk about what's actually going on with you and if there's anything that would be helpful in that. But that would be my short answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Great. So Baldwin says, would love to talk to you. There is this bridge between Jonathan's work and yours. That's for sure.
Yeah, we know that.
Tricia said, fabulous. Glenn Ryan, please elaborate why you think the hexagon is the center of the toroid in the body. To me, these are two separate geometric structures. So please elaborate why the hexagram is the center of the toroid in the body.
Well, I mean, once you have one geometry, you have all geometries, right? So I think that one thing is a lot of people also say everything about penta or everything about hexa or what have you.
They're separate.
Okay, well, I mean, I've spent 25 years and I've got a lot of stuff in my program. I don't know how to answer that in a short period of time, but I will say that that I believe that geometry, which as is witnessed in through the body, really does have a connection and an expression with the natural toroidal structure. And
yeah, so I'm just asking you to elaborate what you think that connection is. You may be right. I've never heard of that before. Maybe Dan can comment on that, but I don't know of any such connection. And I mean, if you're hypothesizing that, that's perfectly legitimate.
Sure.
But
yeah. I mean, it's because the frequencies of the body, as they've expressed themselves to me, show very clearly that hexagonal structure. But that doesn't mean that it's the only structure that's functioning in the body.
Right.
Yeah.
And
because I think what it's showing is a light frequency structure through the body. I don't think that we could say that a toroidal structure isn't connected to light frequency. Would you say that?
yes, it probably is. But to go back to your other statement about light not being well understood, actually, light is very well understood. What's not understood is the higher forms of light, but spiritual light, if you will, esoteric light, the kind of light that you and I want to talk about is not talked about in the physics literature, although there is now starting to be an interest in what's called quantum light, light that doesn't behave like ordinary light. It's a bit like, scalar, non-classical energy, non-classical forms of light. That's the part, since you're into the science, that's the part that I would encourage you to read about. And as far, I'm no expert on geometries, but I just wanted to know what you thought the relationship between those two.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a really good question. I mean, I guess ultimately what I'm hypothesizing is that, we talk about meridians and we talk about it in relation to Western physiology. And I think it's a very limited conversation. And in how I've been trained, it's limited because there's more that the body is showing. And I think that when we get past that electromagnetic spectrum as we currently know, and that we're currently kind of, sorry, there's a really loud sound in there. Is that, does somebody have their radio on or something?
I'll mute.
Thank you.
Whoops. I hold on. I have muted you as well.
Okay, I'm
Yeah,
back
there you
on
go.
you. Okay, thanks. So I think that once we look past the electromagnetic spectrum as we know it, right? And I was, the more quantum understandings of it would be past that. Once we start doing that, we can't avoid getting into the biological structure. So I think there's a lot to discover within that. And it's no one's ever said, why would that hexagonal structure be connected to the toroid? I would say the bridge would be light, some kind of form of light. I'm not the scientist. I just know what the body has taught me and how over all of the years of working on other bodies and working with myself, it's worked. It works really well to be able to unlock tensions on a neural level. And my guidance and all the theory that I've put together is pointing in the direction of light. So I would say the answer is there somewhere, but I certainly don't know what the answer is. But I thank you for the thought
Okay, well,
provoking.
so that's the connection. Thank you for the answer.
I didn't know I had one.
Ashley,
There we go.
Ashley, did you have a question? I think you put your hand up before. Ashley,
I do.
there you go. We can hear you.
Ashley.
Hi there. Are you familiar with the chestahedron that was
Yeah.
discovered by Frank Chester?
Yes, I mean, I don't know it really, really well, but George Leoniak is a friend of mine who is also a geometer who's worked with my shape as well. And so that's how I'm familiar with it.
I mean, and what is your opinion about how that relates to, you know, either the heart chakra or the, you know, the heart and or circulatory energies?
Well, if you're talking about the chestahedron specifically, I don't know enough about that particular geometry, but I would have to make it broader by saying that, I mean, even when we're talking about chakras, again, I mentioned it briefly in the presentation, you know, that 7 system that we have of chakras is actually something that we've adopted in a lot of ways. In the Sanskrit text, there's not a 7 system. There's a bunch of different numbered systems. You know, they can be 28 chakras. There can be all these different kinds of chakras. And when I look at the physics as I have been taught it and questioned to understand better, Nassim says that every proton is a black hole. If there's a singularity in so there's trillions and trillions of singularities. And I think a chakra is a singularity. I think we have trillions of them. So then when we're talking about geometries in the body, we're really just talking about angles of frequency. Which one is most efficacious for looking at what you want to approach in the body? So whatever's in the chestahedron and whatever particular angles are there, it would also be valid in just a tetrahedral structure. You see a lot of tetrahedral structure in the shape that I've used, and there would be a lot of pentagonal structure as well. And there's 5 throughout that whole shape, coincidentally. And you can see in Jonathan's work that I also use in my own presentation. Thank you, Jonathan, as always. That there are a lot of different kinds of shapes that are morphing into one another. And the question is, what angle do you want to look at it from? Which one is going to serve you best? This hexagonal structure has been tried and true for, I mean, 25 years I've been working on it, and I've been a bodywork therapist for 25 years. And repeatedly, when I can touch, think in, respond, the nervous system jumps and releases. When I'm teaching people how to stretch in their bodies and they can't move and they don't realize that they can't move well, and we teach how to get the brain to catch up with what's easy and where they start to meet resistance, they start to, one comment that I love was recently somebody said, I just realized my ankle is connected to the middle of my brain. And there are these different neural impulses that really come up because our sensory level is at the top near where the pain threshold starts. But there's all this iceberg. And so what I'm exploring is down in here, and there's so much more to explore. And the fact that it even came up as geometry was mind-blowing to me because I didn't know anything about it. And now I've got some good fluency in the language of it. And I love that it's this philosophical language that we can have whole discussions in, like mathematics, but I'd never be a mathematician. And geometry, I can talk to a physicist and I can have a really good discussion just because we're both using the language of geometry. So I think that that was a really long explanation for your question.
Oh, yeah.
But the
That's
chestahedron fits somewhere.
Yeah, well, there's just, you know, there is a really incredible video that Frank Chester did. And he demonstrates the entire process of how he discovered the chestahedron as the shape of the heart.
Oh, I love
that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it would tie into
Totally.
so much of what you have demonstrated.
Thank you for letting me know. I know that George and I have had some great conversations, but we haven't had a chance to go through them all. So I'll definitely ask him to send me that because I know he'll know it. And he works.
Yeah, he'll know it. It's an incredible video that Frank does, and it's
great.
Yeah.
Thanks
so
for
great.
letting me.
Thank you for that.
Hi, Meredith. I'm Stefan.
Hi, Stefan.
Nice to meet you. I've been doing sound therapy, electro, for about 20 years with sound foot tiles with Jungite tiles in it. So it resonates and it has electrical current. that goes from your hands and your feet. Now your hands and your feet have all your meridians. And so you run the tuning fork programs through your hands and feet. Now each person has a different frequency depending on your height. So you find the root note of the person, and then you can calculate the scale that goes with whatever issues that need to be healed. You can calculate chords that go with those energy centers. And so I broke it down into just programs that we can adjust the tuning of. So depending on the person, because a baby is going to be a lot higher frequency than a larger adult. And then, but I love the idea of all the circuits through your hands and feet, because that's all your meridians. And so through sound and electricity, that's the work that I do. I can show you a little bit of
where are you located, Stefan?
I'm in Philadelphia. So
Okay.
like these are tiles for the feet. And then I have a throne here with transducers. And then I
Wow.
have like all this Tesla technology with magnetic crowns. And so when you're working, I get the perspective of a meteor magnetics, which is star energy. And then running the electricity with the Jungite, it clears the water and the magnetics at the same time with the frequencies. So you're
Wow.
almost becoming a battery. And
That's
then
remarkable.
once you figure out the elements, I start with the Giza frequencies, which is C sharp, F sharp, A sharp, D sharp. And then if you turn that into a F sharp major chord with a low C sharp, then I started putting the pentatonic scale together. And now you have the black keys on a piano, and then the pentatonic can make pentagonal music, right? So you fill in the frequencies of the pyramid, and that's based off of hydrogen and magnetics, the earth frequency. And so that's really cool what you're
Wow.
doing. And so, yeah, I've developed these sound tables. They're like 4,000 watt sound tables, and
Amazing.
chairs that do back bends, and gravity chairs with using subsonic frequencies with the voice. You can tune down octaves and actually create these oscillations. Wah, 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 wah.
Well,
So they
it's
create
really,
beat patterns.
it's interesting too. I mean, I think it's really exciting what's going on right now in the world. And I just gave a presentation at it will be next week at the Global Sound Healing Conference, and what's going on with sound and the body is really fascinating. I do want to share one thing that made me think when you were talking about the meridians in the hands and feet. Of course, meridians run through the whole body, but when you're needling the very extremities of the body, that's when the energy moves the fastest.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
that's just
the Therify would be interesting because it would pick up like an antenna, and you wouldn't have any wires connected to your, because I've always thought about electro needles as well, and then applying the frequencies that go with the meridians. So once you figure out the meridian, because the body's all at the phi ratio as well, so it's pretty predictable. And
well, I do know that I remember once being at a festival, and there was such an intense bass beat, and I walked into the middle of it, and it felt like I thought I was going to drop to my knees. It was and I couldn't believe everybody else was just fine listening to it, so this idea of sound and what we're learning about the body, I think, is really exciting. So thanks for sharing that, Stefan. I appreciate it.
And then also I use 3D visualizers to see the sound in 3D, just so people can get a sense of what's making the sound. So you see the sound waves in multiple directions, and it teaches you like cool. Well, thanks for sharing, and I really appreciate you being on the planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Thanks.
Thanks, Meredith.
Thank you,
Fantastic.
Roger. Pleasure was mine. It's so exciting what you guys are all doing, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and share and hear what you're all doing. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you.